Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament.
The Honourable, the Vice President.
Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, as I was saying before the tea break, Cabinet approved the policy position on the amendment of the Cipriani College of Labour and Cooperative Studies Act, and it was referred to the Honourable Attorney General for the preparation of a bill, a first draft of which we have received at the ministry, and it is being currently reviewed by the legal team, a team of which I am very proud, a team that met its legislative agenda for the last year by 100%, by a very hard-working, loyal, and committed team led by our senior legal officer. Mr. Vice President, if being in hiding could produce such results, then perhaps the Member of Parliament for Couva North, who had the opportunities to serve for a time as Minister in the Ministry of Labour, should have availed himself of the posture so that today we would have remembered at least one action he would have taken to improve the labour landscape of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, labour legislative reform remains a top priority to all of us at the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development. We are committed to reviewing and modernizing the labour legislative framework, recognizing that it is the linchpin of an effective industrial relations system, and we have been delivering. It is my commitment that by 2020, the 10 pieces of labour legislation we have identified for review or enactment in the current term of this administration will be addressed. Mr. Vice President, on this note, let me briefly address one point that was raised by the Member of Parliament for Couva North concerning the simplification of the process for certification and recognition of trade unions. That issue is embraced in the draft policy paper with regards to reducing the time frame to at least 6 months. Additionally, the Registration, Recognition and Certification Board, I understand, is working on streamlining its operations for greater efficiency. It is anticipated, Mr. Vice President, that in the coming months, more draft policy position papers will engage the attention of the government, and draft legislation amending existing labour laws will be tabled in Parliament at the earliest time subsequent to further rounds of consultation. Mr. Vice President, I now turn my brief attention, given the fact that my time is limited, with regards to employment promotion. The government of Trinidad and Tobago is committed to promoting decent work for all in Trinidad and Tobago. Decent work encompasses job creation, the promotion of the fundamental principles and rights at work, social protection, and social dialogue. This, Mr. Vice President, is a commitment which is enshrined in the official policy framework and in the National Development Strategy Vision 2030. It is also in keeping with Goal 8 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which speaks to promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. Mr. Vice President, I want to spend just some few minutes on the 10-point plan on unemployment. Mr. Vice President, I know that unemployment and the implementation of the 10-point plan have been foremost in the minds of many of my colleagues and citizens on the other side, and citizens. We would wish to remind that it was this government that swung into action after being in office a mere 6 months into our term to develop the 10-point plan on unemployment in response to the increasing numbers of persons who were being retrenched and becoming unemployed at that time. This plan, the first of its kind in the history of this country, was approved for implementation by Cabinet in April 2016. It seeks to assist unemployed persons and retrenched workers by empowering them towards reintegration into decent work, including through job placements and supporting establishment, small businesses and cooperatives. Mr. Vice President, in keeping with Vision 2030, the ministry has adopted a whole-of-government approach in order to achieve the employment objectives of the plan. Mr. Vice President, we have been implementing the 10-point plan on unemployment through a program known as Adversity to Opportunity. The program includes strategies such as provision of seed capital and startup business financing, operationalization of training programs, and support for the formation of small businesses and cooperatives, the development of a marketing campaign to solicit new job opportunities, and the provision of psychological and financial counseling for unemployed and retrenched persons. Mr. Vice President, another critical aspect of the plan relates to an unemployment register. The register was launched on March 18, 2016, and it seeks to capture unemployed persons and retrenched workers, their financial obligations, job experience, skills, and interests. The register is accessible via the website of the National Employment Service, which is a unit of the Ministry of Labor. As of October 19, 2017, 1,300 persons were on the register. Mr. Vice President, a quick profile of the registrants show that there were more women on the register, 61%, than men. The majority of the registrants, 56%, were non-unionized, and more than one-half of registrants indicated that retrenchment worsened their emotional well-being and household financial situation. In this context, I am deeply appreciative of the assistance of all our partners and stakeholders who continue to work with us in assisting unemployed persons in this country. Mr. Vice President, I turn my attention to the restructuring of the on-the-job training program, popularly known as the OJT program. This program, which has been making a great impact on the employment and employability of young persons in Trinidad and Tobago, through two-year training program, nationals of this country between the ages of 16 years and 35 years are afforded an induction into the world of work and a foothold into the labor market. Mr. Vice President, I would like to take the opportunity to recognize the visionary leadership of our former Prime Minister, Patrick Augustus Mervyn Manning, who introduced the OJT concept into Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that young persons in this country are afforded the opportunity to obtain the necessary work experience during their 2-year sojourn. Mr. Vice President, with effect from September 23, 2015, this program, which was formerly under the Ministry of Education National Training Agency, was placed under the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development. Since that time, we have been focusing on restructuring the program, where the emphasis has been shifted from quantity of placement to the quality of training afforded the trainees. Mr. Vice President, with effect from September 1, 2016, the stipends of the OJTs were increased by 10%, which represents the fulfillment of a promise made by this government in the 2015 to 2016 budget. A total of 5,668 trainees have benefited from this increase in stipend. Of that total amount of trainees, 5,109 are assigned to the public sector, with 559 being assigned to the private sector. Mr. Vice President, within the OJT program, we are doing more with less. Yes, the allocation for the program has been reduced, but this is as a result of greater efficiency and focus on value for money. And Mr. Vice President, I want to take the opportunity here to point out that nothing, no organization, no structure in this country has escaped the corruption of the former administration. We have found, Mr. Vice President, we have found ghosts even in the OJT program. Ghost trainees, ghost bank accounts, totaling millions of dollars, Mr. Vice President. That is an investigation that I launched last year, and that investigation continues. Millions of taxpayers' dollars cannot be accounted for, and therefore we had to restructure the program and put it under the Ministry of Labor as directed by Cabinet. So that, Mr. Vice President, when my colleagues on the other side wants to talk and throw words, they have to be very careful. Those who live in glass houses ought not to throw stones. The OJTP was integrated as a division of the Ministry of Labor, Mr. Vice President, with effect from 31st May 2017. And it allowed us a critical review of the organizational structure, ever mindful of the need to streamline our operations so that, Mr. Vice President, those ghost OJTs that have been weeded out of the program, totaling millions of dollars, we can now fill those places with real life OJT. Many young people, young persons out there who do not have a job, who employers will not employ because all employers want you to have experience. All those young persons can find a place in the OJT. We encourage young persons out there who you are qualified, you have your subjects, you have your diploma, you have your first degree, you have your master's. There is an opportunity for you with the OJT, but you have to go in and register. We have discontinued for a short period online registration because of the contamination and the corruption that we have discovered in this program, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, so that a lot of adjustments would have been made and would have to be made to the program. And in that context, we have undertaken a cleanup and verification exercise to ensure that all trainees on our system are real live trainees and not ghosts in the system, benefiting a few persons. But Mr. Vice President, I will come back to this House and share the results of that report into the ghosts in the OJT. In this context, Mr. Vice President, in the fiscal year 2016 to 2017, 5,100 trainees were placed throughout the 5 regions, including Tobago. We project a similar placement level for 2017-2018. I foresee great achievements under the restructured OJT program in the course of this fiscal year and in the future. I therefore want to publicly commend the director of the OJTP program for her tireless, loyal, and honest service to the government and by extension the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, I turn my attention to the promotion of the National Employment Service. The Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development continues to focus attention on facilitating both employers and job seekers through our free employment service known as the National Employment Service, popularly known as NES. NES is key in the implementation of our 10-point plan, and through its network of offices located throughout.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Throughout Trinidad and Tobago, through this unit, we have been assisting thousands of job seekers in finding jobs and preparing for the world of work and improving their employability. As a matter of fact, we also prepare secondary school students for the world of work. And for the period September 2015 to August 2017, 3,042 students participated in World of Work seminars conducted by this unit. Mr. Vice President, a key program under the purview of the NES is the Commonwealth Caribbean Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, popularly known as the Canadian Farm Program. This program involves the temporary employment of Trinidad and Tobago nationals on Canadian farms in the provinces of Ontario and Alberta from January 1st to December 15 in any given year. Close to 1,000 citizens of this country participate in this program each year. And I am advising all interested parties, we are in the process of preparing another batch to go off to Canada, and therefore they can submit their application to the acting permanent secretary of the ministry to be considered for the next batch that leaves in January 2018. Now, up to about 1,000, we take 1,000 every year. Mr. Vice President, this program has afforded participants with both the skill and income to become independently successful. We at the ministry, Mr. Vice President, we are particularly proud of this program because of the skills that these workers inculcate. They come back here. We know of one of such worker who became an entrepreneur in Central, Mr. Dipsing. I paid a personal visit to his highly successful hydroponics farm in December 2016. We have showcased what he is doing and the benefits that one can be derived through the assistance of the Government Information Services. They developed a documentary, and that was aired on television in 2017. Mr. Vice President, there is so much to say about the cooperative development and strengthening the program. So much to say about the youth junior cooperatives that have been established and working very successfully. So much to say about small business development and NETCO, which is being led by the former executive director of the unit trust, Mr. Clary Ben, who is transforming the National Entrepreneurship Development Company Limited, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vice President, so much to talk about the Fair Share Program and the National Integrated Business Incubator System at the Ministry. So much to talk about the National Tripartite Advisory Council, Mr. Vice President, which was established by the Honorable Prime Minister on March 15, 2016, just 6 months into our term. Mr. Vice President, there have been problems within the National Tripartite Advisory Council. Those problems have been resolved with the intervention of the Honorable Prime Minister, and NTAC has its work, its program to look at productivity and work ethic, to look at the issues of socio-economic impact of retrenchment, including retrenchment and its impact on the industrial relations landscape, to look at initiatives to bring outstanding public sector wage negotiations up to date, to focus on government bureaucracy and its impact on competitiveness, to also focus on income inequalities. Mr. Vice President, NATAC has a very clear plan upon which it will continue to build. Mr. Vice President, so much to talk about the ministry engaged in the promotion of rights and responsibilities at the workplace, the fact that the ministry, we have in place a revised HIV/AIDS policy for the workplace, which was launched in Trinidad and which was launched also in Tobago, Mr. Vice President. But in conclusion, Mr. Vice President, amidst the challenging economic climate and labor market challenges, the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development will continue to do its part in changing the paradigm, in inculcating a culture of value for money, in bringing about a change in the mindset of higher levels of productivity and performance, and in establishing strong work ethics.
Minister, your time is up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Raffoul.
Thank you all so much. As always, it's such a pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity as a young person and as an economist to contribute to this debate. I want to really commend everybody that spoke before this. I feel like the atmosphere has changed in a really good way, especially the first day of the debate. I feel like there's a lot more collaboration. And, you know, sometimes we can see that a deficit is something to be so afraid of. And then in other ways, it really helps us to change the paradigm, no pun intended, and to really start changing the way we operate as a society and as, you know, as a parliament. So I welcome the changes. You know, no one likes uncertainty, and we don't like not knowing exactly what this year is going to bring. But I welcome that this can be an opportunity for us to do better for our country. So in my contribution today, I wanted to go into 4 segments. The first, why a budget matters in the first place. Second, give my interpretation of what the economic numbers are showing. Third, give my commendations and also comment on where I see some risks that were presented within the budget. And fourth, my technical recommendations on what I would like to see done differently in the future. I know we have covered economic debates in the past, so I don't want to repeat everything I've said in the past and not add anything new. So I'm going to touch on some of the things I've said in the past and elaborate on some other projects that I see as opportunities. So the first segment, what I want to talk about, why a budget matters. How we spend money dictates so much in our quality of life. There's one part of Vision 2030 that I liked. A lot of it I didn't really like, to be honest. But the one part that I did like is around page 50, and it goes into quality of life. There are things that you can't always quantify, and that Vision 2030 tries to quantify in some ways, and there's overlapping stuff with the Sustainable Development Goals. But this part around page 50 was really, really useful because it really showed that our goals as a society are to make sure that all of us have an improved quality of life, that we can all achieve our higher potential. And that's sometimes a bit hard to quantify. It's a bit intangible. But I like that it was really all about community, family, spirituality, having the environment, not just the economic environment, but the social environment, that we can all achieve our highest... Pardon? Yeah, exactly. Our highest holistic, you know, being. That's okay. I'm sometimes not sure exactly if the crosstalk is being directed at me or somebody else. So my apologies for the pausing. Okay. So I really liked that part of Vision 2030 that was all about us as individuals achieving our higher potential. I also really like that we emphasize local production, and a lot of the phrases that were bandied about on Tuesday, the first day of the debates, like the Honourable, Senator, Vice President, forgive me because your terms change, when you had said that no, the same thinking that went into creating the problem can't be used to solve the problem, that's something that I think is so poignant, our situation now, and how we can change things in the future. And I love that the Minister of Agriculture said that it's not about how much we spend, but about the quality that we spend. And the example he used with the farmers markets, I thought that was really fitting. I also love the emphasis on local production. I'm a huge fan of local chocolate. I bring chocolate to every single sitting. So I always have chocolate with me. And I'm a big fan of anything that's locally produced. Sometimes we often think that things that are imported are better for some reason. And I think chocolate is something we have so much potential to export internationally. So there was a lot that I liked. Regarding the diagnostics, my interpretation of the economic numbers, I prefer to use revenue and expenditure data numbers rather than GDP, because GDP can fluctuate really widely, especially for an economy like ours. So in terms of the revenue and expenditure data, the IMF data, which is all available on their website, I looked back to 1990, and I'm going to focus on the 2000s. 1990 was 27 years ago, so it's not particularly, it's not in recent memory. But I chose that year because that was the year that we had the first year of positive increases in revenue year upon year upon year up until 2008. And as a student of econ, studying, learning that we were one of the few economies in the entire world to do that from 1990 to 2008, completely unbroken positive growth. That to me was an interesting year. Of course, in the 70s, we had the oil boom. In the 80s, we had the deficit and the restructuring. 1990. So I look back. Our revenue in 1990 was only $5 billion. And we've had successive increases since then. 1990 to 2000. 2000, I remember. 1990, I barely remember. I was 6 years old. 2000 was only 17 years ago. I remember that because I was a student, I was in school. Everyone remembers their school days. 2000, our revenue was $12 billion. 2008, it was $56 billion. We had slow and gradual increases, but positive, strong, predictable ones from 1990 to 2000. And then 2000 to 2008, massive increases. So now we're talking about $50 billion in expenditure and these entrenched expectations. So it's interesting to go back to such a recent time period and see when did these entrenched expectations become entrenched, and are they or are they not? So 2008 is an anomaly year, and I don't really like to refer to it because it was not expected. We did have increases in the expectations from 2000 to 2007, a windfall, which is the opposite of a negative shock. So a negative shock is when we have a decline and it's not expected. A positive shock is also called a windfall, and so we have an increase and it is not expected. But there was an element in which we did have an expectation because we knew that the Atlantic LNG streams 1 through 4 were coming on stream. So we were expecting that they would come on stream. We were expecting some increase in revenues, and we had expenditure that was in fitting with our expectations. So that's the important point to note. And then we were expecting some of this windfall, and then some of it was not expected. So I think it was about 50-50 in the sense of we were expecting the increase in oil and gas revenue, but it was happening at a time when global oil prices were increasing unexpectedly. So some of it was expected and some of it was not. And that's the era, if I remember correctly, when the HSF was created to make sure we had a buffer in the future. 2007, our revenues was $40 billion. So from 2000 to 2007, our revenues more than tripled. That is unprecedented. And, you know, sometimes we say God is a Trini. I am sure that God has a little piece of land in Tobago and he's a chocolate producer on the side. Like, we are so lucky in so many ways. So 2000, our gross revenue was 12 billion. 2007, it was 40. 2008, massive anomaly year, 56 billion. 2009 went back down to about 40. Technically, it was like 39.5, but just about 40. So 2008, not expected. Everybody else in the world is panicking, and we are lucky. Everybody else in the world, you know, banks are crashing, and yet we're gaining. So 2008, an anomaly year. 2007, 2009, about 40. So if we use that 40 billion as a benchmark and not the 56 billion as a benchmark for expenditure, I think it's more apt and fitting to use that. I mean, even then, you can say anywhere between 12 billion, which is a 2000 year revenue stream, to the 40 billion. So is a good benchmark to use to compare where we are now to where we were then, and that was only 10 years ago. So, and you know, also to say that we had these massive increases in revenue, but also doesn't necessarily mean it was spent well. You know, I remember that era being the era also when there were massive grants to state-owned institutions. The murder rate went from 99 to 200 and something, and then gradually 300 and something, and then it crossed over to 400 more recently. But I remember that era as being a time of mismanagement, despite the fact that we had this massive revenue stream. And that was the era of the kidnappings, when everything started, and massive crime, and everybody was afraid. So even though we had good economic numbers, we didn't have good management. And then more recently, we saw from 2009 to now that we were expecting, again, this was after the 2008 financial crisis, we were expecting declines in revenue, but we were still experiencing increases somehow. So we had 40 billion or so in 2009, and then we went basically up from then until about 2014, if my memory serves me correct. If not, I can pull up the IMF data. And then that's when we started having declines in revenue. Now, a point I've made before is we had two things happening simultaneously. We had revenues declining just in the last 2 or 3 years, but we had deficits happening from 2009 onwards. So even though we were still increasing our revenue stream, we were overspending that. And I'm glad now that we have this awareness over the last year or two that we can, you know, we can change the future. But when I think of the tone of panic that's sometimes happening now in the media, I think it's a bit unwarranted. And I think we're actually not horribly off. Yes, we have a major deficit, and I think we have a plan going forward. But I don't think that we should be sending the tone of alarmism and panic to our population. And I think that does us more of a disservice than a benefit. Specifically, I speak to so many people who say that, you know, their kids are going to university and they tell them, don't come back home. Trinidad is nothing for you. You know, I am almost 34, I am here, you know, but for young people who are going off to school and they're being told by their parents, don't come back. You know, and every time you turn on the news, there's drama, there's negativity. And the numbers are not necessarily in line with that need for alarmism. I think there are some strategies in place that are good, but I just wanted to give that macro perspective of how the numbers now are different from 10 years ago, and they're drastically not that different on the revenue side. It does baffle me a bit how on the expenditure side, we had $40 billion 10 years ago and that was being spent badly, and now we have $50 billion in expenditure, and I'm not necessarily seeing value for money. So there are a few things I will go into. I would like to give my commendations on a few things I saw in the budget that I thought were good. The pre-budget forum that happened the week before, I wasn't there in person, but I really liked it. I watched the entire thing afterwards online. We only got the invitation the day before, so I don't know about the rest of you all, if you were there or not. But I couldn't make it in person. But I really liked the tone of it, because to me it was all about being straightforward and about genuine collaboration. That's the impression I got watching it. And I also want to commend the entire ministry for their service. Yourself as a new minister, as well as Minister Imbert. I know that it cannot be easy, the amount of long hours, and the fact that there's always this psychological aspect in the sense of everyone is afraid because money deals with survival. I think that there must always be a sense of urgency and a sense of fear from the population, and having to deal with the technicals as well as that must be a huge task. I don't envy you all at all. And as a citizen, I appreciate that you all are not responsible for creating the problem, but are trying your best to solve the problem. And I appreciate that, and I commend that. I really liked, my favorite part of the entire budget was the grants for entrepreneurs. It was $50 million. I think it's great. I really liked Senator Crease's suggestion also that we make it partly repayable by the entrepreneurs so that it goes back into a rotating fund and that it doesn't kind of imbue us with a sense of dependency going forward, as well as the fact that, then we're more careful, for the entrepreneurs who are applying, because we know we have to pay some of it back or a lot of it back, depending on the conditions. But I would like to see the criteria for this developed further, in combination with entrepreneurship agencies and entities. Startup Chile was, fantastic in its impact. Startup Dominican Republic is trying to emulate it. There are startup programs that have done really well internationally. We can look at those, as well as just have discussions about what the drawbacks are to being here in Trinidad and Tobago and how we can go forward. The money that's being spent on culture as an economic industry, I really like. At first, I'll be honest, I was a little bit hesitant because I thought, a live music district. I love live music, Trini music, but if we can't run a ferry, how are we going to run a live music district? And I had this skepticism, not because of any reason other than this public-private collaboration mechanism in Trinidad. But then I learned more about it, and what I've learned is that because the financing allocation is so small, the program is going to be working with private sector hand in hand, and on Aripita Avenue in particular, as well as the other venues that were noted. So when I heard that aspect of it, it's the how, I really loved it. And I just want to give my commendation for that also. And the overall emphasis from the budget, I really liked, in the sense of it was all about emphasizing a rebalancing and reducing subsidies over time. And again, I want to commend the stopping of the Rapid Rail project. That was a decision that was made 2 years ago. And I think that it takes a lot of courage to say, we looked at the numbers again and they don't add up, so we're not going to go through with it. And sometimes it takes more strength to not go through with something than to create a new project. And I think it's worth commending. So those are the things I really liked. There were some things I see as risky. As I'd mentioned about the tone and the alarm that was given in the budget speech, the potential brain drain impact that could come from it, as well as capital flight. A lot of people, or I also hear of, selling their assets and investing overseas. And I feel like if we don't change that tone, that could be a major risk for our country. Also, I saw a lot of, I heard mixed messages from the budget. So on one hand, I heard, we're going to reduce subsidies, and then the expenditure was the same as last year, 50 billion. I thought the statement about the RIC, the Regulated Industries Commission, to be a bit incomplete, in the sense that what we were told is that, yeah, we're going to reduce them, but it's up to the Regulated Industries Commission. That's part of our constitution. And yet, when other things that were constitutional matters were relevant over the last 2 years, we changed the constitution. So we had a debt ceiling of 60% of GDP, we increased it to 70%. We changed the constitution. The constitution is a tool in which we support our country's development, and there are safeguards and mechanisms to make sure that there isn't inherent risk to our population. But I feel like saying that the Regulated Industries Commission's in charge and we leave it completely up to them was just a little bit too incomplete. because it's our responsibility to say, well, we can change the Constitution if need be, or we can work with them. But I feel like that's something that we need to do and not just be dismissive of. In terms of the diagnostics that were presented in the assessment of the economic numbers over the last 5 to 10 years, the reference to us experiencing a negative shock, as an economist, I disagree with that. A shock, by definition, is something that is unexpected. We expected this. We have seen declines internationally in every sector, and especially in oil and gas prices. The entire world is going towards renewables. China is building, I think, a windmill every hour. I mean, there's solar panels in the deserts. The entire world is changing, and we just said, it's okay, God is in Tobago. Like, we're good. Everything will be all right. And while maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's a rational behavior. If things are going great now, and we're a small country, how much human resources do we allocate to changing the paradigm, right? But that said, the definition of a negative shock, we saw this coming. This is not a shock. We didn't plan adequately for it. And then, on a slightly more positive note, I find it's always interesting whenever we start a speech with looking at the problems and without looking at the strengths of our country and our economy. I love that, sitting here for the last 2.5 days, I have heard different prayers and sayings and songs from all different languages and religions referenced, and it's something that we all embrace. I think the most beautiful thing we have about us is our country and our society. The fact that we all come from different religions, races, beliefs, and there's just so much strength here. There's so much music and creativity, and peace and tolerance and love. And I feel like that is something no one else in the world really has. And speaking with visitors who come to Trinidad and Tobago and they kind of see it and experience it, maybe we take it for granted because we're from here, but I feel like we have so much unity and compassion towards each other, maybe more outside of this chamber than inside the chamber, but I feel like that's something that's really evident and a strength in our society. And we always talk about problems, but let's also acknowledge our strengths. Also creativity and music, local jewelry, local industries, local food. I've mentioned chocolate already. First country in the world to create, only country in the world to create a musical instrument in the last century. Steel pan, soca, calypso, rap. So, I mean, there's so many beautiful things about our country. One thing I didn't like about Vision 2030 was, there was a part that was comparing us to Japan, because in Japan, electronic exports are such a big facet of their economy. I don't think we necessarily need to compete with that. I think we have other things and other strengths we can compete with. And now they are, they had their first carnival this year. So there's so many positive things we have. We don't necessarily need to compare ourselves to other countries in the world when it comes to the negatives and what we don't have. So just because Japan has, a high percentage of electronics in their exports doesn't mean that we have to start targeting ours if it's not part of our natural comparative advantage. One risk that I didn't elaborate on, I feel like there were some mixed messages within the budget statement. So on one hand, we're being told that it's all about strengthening private sector. And then other things I heard coming through were still mega projects and construction projects in particular, and desalination plant in Tobago. And in the post-budget forum that was the day after, the statement that we can't pull out of retail sales, example was cars, because then the entire car industry would collapse. Things do not need to be done overnight, per se. Yes, we don't want to have negative impacts on the private sector from government reducing its over-expenditure. But the mixed messages, to me, was a little bit of a concern as a citizen. I feel like a lot was said that was later contradicted, and I just want to make sure that we are keeping that emphasis on private sector being the engine of growth and public sector being more the regulator and facilitator. Right now, the government is kind of both. it's a regulator and facilitator, weekly so, and a project manager, executor, weekly so. And I think that, and then the private sector might be rent-seeking, you know, taking revenues where they can. And there is some innovation, but there's also some distortions in the market because of that imbalance. The government, I think, should just kind of go back to its core place as a regulator and facilitator and strengthen the private sector's ability to really be the project implementation in Trinidad and Tobago. In terms of the fiscal strategies that were suggested, there were three in particular that I wanted to briefly comment on. One was the change in tax rates for corporations as well as banks and gaming industry. And although, yes, it was noted that tax collections would be enforced, I have been hearing this for a very long time. I think it's been in 30 successive budget statements now. I could be wrong. But since I started reading budget statements about 15 years ago, they've been in every single one, i.e. the emphasis on restructuring and strengthening the Board of Inland Revenue. What I feel like we did instead was increase the rates of taxes on the industries which are being profitable. And that is, it's an easier overnight option. But it's negative because it's unfair. It places burden on the people who are already tax compliant rather than on the people who are not paying their taxes. And the other negative is that it's a disincentive, because if companies are now actually being, companies in other industries are now being profitable, they might not want to show that they're being profitable. They might not declare their taxes accurately, because then for them, if they show that they're doing well, that particular sector might then experience an increase in the tax rate next year. So we are having increases in tax rates on profitable industries, and that might serve as a disincentive to other industries in the future. A number that came up before that I just wanted to reiterate is from the EITI. They did a seminar about a year and a half ago to parliamentary members, and the EITI is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And they said that when they started tracking the quarry companies, that the revenues collected in taxes from the quarry companies was only $34 million that year. And the year after, because of the EITI initiative, the revenues collected in taxes from quarry companies was now $1,050 million. So the quantity of tax leakage is huge. The AG said in a seminar that was to the Chamber of Commerce, June 2016, it was on the Chamber of Commerce's website, that the volume of tax leakage in Trinidad and Tobago is pretty much on par with the volume of tax collected. I think the Honourable Minister made the same comments during her opening speech on Tuesday, that there's $12 to $18 billion in uncollected tax revenue. That was a study done by UE, if I remember correctly. So I would like to see that we really implement what we say we're going to implement about the Board of Inland Revenue and increasing enforcement of tax collections. Because to increase tax rates just doesn't feel fair. And to be honest, it's not equitable. What is private sector getting for the increases in taxes? I really liked, congratulations again to Senator Hayes, who spoke on Tuesday, the emphasis on the social contract and knowing that, yes, citizens have to play their part in paying taxes, where we're responsible to each other. There's a social contract. But also the government in collecting taxes and spending it on our behalf, that there needs to be a two-way relationship in making sure there's quality and good expenditure. Now, I'm not saying anything yet that's rocket science, so I'll try and be a bit more brief in my points in future. So that was one of the fiscal mechanisms that was in the budget speech. The other one that I really wanted to comment on was the over-reliance of construction as being the solution to stimulate economic activity. To me, the way I see this is that it's completely wrong for Trinidad and Tobago. It's the wrong medicine for the solution, for the problem. So in developed countries, I'm thinking of the United States after the Great Depression, the increase in government expenditure was used as a way to stimulate the economy because the problem was lack of aggregate demand, i.e. there wasn't enough spending, there wasn't enough circularity of money flowing in the economy. And there was the recognition that this could be a solution, and it worked. Trinidad, we don't have that as the problem. The problem is too much spending. So if we try and do the same thing, we're going to spend more and not necessarily stimulate private sector. The other problem with this is that every time we spend public sector revenues, 80 to 90% of that is spent on imports. So that affects the foreign exchange imbalance even further, and that doesn't really stimulate local flow of money. So it's the wrong medicine because it's not going to stimulate aggregate demand, it's going to stimulate over expenditure, and then it's going to have a negative effect on the foreign exchange. Thirdly, under the category of fiscal risks, is choosing golden sectors for diversification. In econ, there's a first best mechanism for stimulating economic activity and a second best. So the first best is, it's hard, it's complicated, and that's why we have a second best. So the first best is having an economic environment that's conducive to growth. You can't do this overnight, and that's why we have the second best. So that would be things like a functioning port, educated labor force, excellent education system, proper air bridge, lack of major traffic restrictions. And you have everything that's working, ease of doing business with public sector. I think those are some of the things that Senator Shriki Soon brought up in the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Rankings, that the environment for growth is pivotal to stimulating economic activity. Second best set of mechanisms is when we say, okay, let's have an incentive. So let's incentivize tourism or agriculture or yachting or electronics, ICT, things that we have in our white paper and our green paper on investment. So this second best is somewhat rational in the sense of saying, okay, we know that if we stimulate food production, it's a strength for us. There's an impact underlying it. And that will impact other sectors. It impacts because, food security, better health, etc., as well as impact on other industries that are close by. So the incentives that we have currently, sometimes they're hard to access. For example, when it comes to cultural incentives, if you are doing a feature-length film, you're eligible for the incentives. But if you're doing short films, you're not eligible. So you then would have to go through the effort of repackaging your short films into a feature-length film to be eligible for the incentives under Film TT. If you are applying for the cultural incentives, it's a quite substantial incentive. I think it's about 50%. It's 150% tax allowance for your expenditure. And the criteria for that, it will fund publications, but it won't support websites. And in 2017, websites and social media are really critical to doing growth-oriented industries in an international forum. As one colleague pointed out recently, Barbados doesn't necessarily promote itself to its regional neighbors, but what they do is they have Rihanna as an ambassador, and she posts stuff on social media and it's seen by an international audience. So not using social media and not having social media and even websites, which are kind of within the category of social media, not having updated mechanisms of international dissemination, be eligible for these incentives, is a deterrent to young entrepreneurs that are within these sectors. I was also a little bit concerned about the housing sector incentives that were mentioned in the budget. The day after, the Chamber of Commerce had their very controversial budget forum, post-budget forum, and the minister said during the Q&A that regarding the housing incentives, that he spoke to colleagues in housing, and they said, and he said, what can we do as a government to help stimulate the housing sector? And colleagues said, nothing. They said, we don't need anything. I think, if I remember correctly, he said that it was more about, that they referred to more the town and country approvals and being able to strengthen the entire system, but not requiring financial incentives as much. And yet, one of the main things that was pointed to in the budget was this financial incentives for housing development companies. So maybe there was more that wasn't elaborated on, but when I watched the forum, as a citizen, I thought, well, was this a one-sided set of incentives from the government? How did these incentives come to be? What was the process? And are they needed? Are they going to make a difference? Or is it going to be contributing to further leakage, further FX imbalances, because we're going to be importing construction materials? Is it going to be more of a negative? And is it going to be causing a distortion in the housing market so that, so that costs might not come down after all? On the expenditure side, I wanted to talk about the waste-to-energy plants briefly. How much time do I have left, Mr. Vice President?
We have just a little bit over 6 minutes.
Okay. Wow. Time flies. Well, I have about 4 or 5 more points to make, so I'll have to be extremely brief.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I gotcha. Okay, so waste-to-energy plants. SwimCall recently did a really great recycling initiative with the Tunapuna Regional Corporation. And I learned a lot more after seeing this about exactly how waste management and collection works. This is something I'm really passionate about because I've had a lot of health issues in the past. In addition to studying econ, I also studied yoga and integrative nutrition. And my entire family has had major health issues. My mum has an autoimmune disorder. My dad and his entire family have had cancer. And a few years ago, I was diagnosed with a precursor to an autoimmune condition. So I've had to really learn a lot more about environmental chemicals and environmental toxins and how they impact on health and how they can be removed from the environment without necessarily having such a negative impact on us. In a way, I was lucky because my parents could tell that I was sick. About 3 years ago, I just looked sick. And I kept saying, oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, I'll figure it out. And they dragged me to the States to go to a functional medicine doctor, and I did a variety of different tests, and one of those was on heavy metal toxicity. And I found out that I had heavy metals in my body, which I was surprised at because I was eating an impeccable organic diet at the time. At the time, I was vegan, so I wasn't even eating fish, no high sources of anything. And I just learned from that organic food is usually affected by mercury if it's imported from the States because of coal mines, and a lot more about health and the impact of environmental chemicals. Given that I have a very short amount of time, forgive me, I'm just going to make this point quickly. So SwimCall right now receives $75 million in allocations annually. They've received the same value since 2009. And what they're in charge of is waste disposal. The regional corporations, though, get $280 million every year, and they're in charge of waste collection. So we don't have one entity doing both. We have two entities working collaboratively, doing different things. I think and SwimCall is underfunded. Their waste management expenditure works out about $17 US a ton per waste, and internationally the benchmark for proper waste disposal is 40 to 100. Now, it would be fine if we were doing it effectively at $17 a ton, but there has been waste leakage and contamination of the environment. In the 80s or 90s, there was a massive problem with lead contamination in Arima, which I didn't know until recently. And then also CPEP and URP get in total combined $1 billion in allocations. So SWIMCOL is being underfunded, and because of that, they can't dispose of waste properly. There's a major risk then to fires, as well as leachate contamination, of our food and our water supplies. And that leads to more long-term health impacts in the future, and that's what I'm really concerned about as a citizen. The water supply and the food supply being healthy and clean is of utmost importance. The Minister of Finance said in his speech last year, the budget speech, that when there are cancer patients, it costs the state $500,000 per patient. And then, there might also be loss of life and trauma to the family, loss of productivity, but that's just the treatment alone. And, in fitting with the broader theme of Vision 2030, it's about us being able to achieve our, highest potential and not being prevented from that because of health and wellness concerns. What I wanted to quickly conclude with was what I would recommend going forward. I have a bullet point list. I'm going to try and be extremely succinct. Because we are taking loans, what I would recommend is that we look at loans from development finance institutions. Okay. Because we're taking loans, I would recommend that we take loans from development finance institutions, specifically the IDB and the Latin American Development Bank. We have taken a $2 billion TT loan from the Latin American Development Bank, and we have loans available from the IDB that have not been taken up yet. So they're policy-based loans, the conditions are excellent, 2% interest and thereabouts. And they're based on a condition or a policy being brought forward by the government. And the conditions are normally very much in line with the country being able to have full control of the negotiation process, and the conditions being something that is already within the government's stated objectives. So, for example, reduction in subsidies, or renewable energy policy, or procurement reform. So things that are positive and things that are beneficial. So this is an easy and lucky thing that we have this opportunity to apply for these loans because of our current economic climate. Policy-based loans. Briefly, I'd also recommend further cutting expenditure, innovative financial instruments for development, PPPs, and social impact bonds, and a mixed bag approach to the foreign exchange regime where we look at fiscal changes, i.e. reduction in expenditure, as well as monetary changes, monetary policy changes, and taking a mixed bag approach. Because I have, I think, finished my time, I am very grateful to all of you for your time. If anybody needs chocolate, you know where I sit. And thank you all for your work and service to our country. I am very grateful to be here and to have this time with you all. Thank you.
Who's next? Senator Ameen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I want to commend I want to begin by congratulating young Senator Haynes, Senator Obika, and Senator Hosein for their maiden contributions on this opposition bench, as well as to congratulate the two temporary senators today. Mr. Vice President, I cannot begin my contribution without a thought for the hundreds, or rather thousands, of citizens affected by flooding in South, Central, and North Trinidad as we speak. The government's lack of action is really appalling, to say the least. We have seen a real lack of interest led by the Prime Minister, whose excuse was that he had to be in Parliament for Budget Finance Committee. And that excuse, Mr. Vice President, it really reeks of disdain, of a lack of care and compassion. And we got a sense that he really didn't know what to do or what his job entailed. And today makes it perhaps 7 or 8 days, I think it's 8 days, since we have seen these life-threatening floods. We have had 11 out of 14 corporations severely affected, thousands of homes underwater, thousands of citizens without food and water trapped in various places. And in fact, I read, I think it was yesterday in the Express, Kasib Ali, age 52, whose body was found in the Lengwa River at Kunjal Road in Barakpur, is suspected to be a victim of floods having, until they do the autopsy, but he's suspected. And I want to express condolences to his family and to ask the government to take note that this flood has in fact taken at least one life that we know of. And sadly, Mr. Vice President, the response from the Prime Minister, you know, first he blamed having to be in Parliament for the budget. He blamed the ODPM. He visited one place and ignored the rest of the country. And the very next day he was flying out. And I heard, I saw, I think it was in today's Express, where, and I want to quote the Prime Minister, where he said, some idiot suggested that he was flying out for his birthday. Well, I want to take the opportunity to wish him a happy birthday and a safe trip. And I'm happy that, ironically, the conference that he was attending, or is attending rather, is for Cooperation for Prevention and Treatment of Natural Disasters. And I am certain that the Prime Minister has quite a thing or two to learn about disasters and coordinating a national and effective national response. But this has been leadership, PNM leadership Rowley style. And when we compare that, we cannot help but compare that to the reaction of the Leader of Opposition, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, which really is boots on the ground and action and reaching the needs of the people. Perhaps, Mr. Vice President, if some more of this government's, Madam President, perhaps if more of this Prime Minister's government's focus was on cleaning watercourses rather than grooming golf courses, we would be in a better situation today. On that note, I want to take this opportunity, Madam President, to wholeheartedly condemn the statement of Prime Minister Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley in his budget contribution in the lower house, in his outrageous defense of a $3 million allocation for the upgrade of the Chaguaramas golf course, where he inappropriately and distastefully likened golf courses to women. Madam President, any society where women are disrespected is bound to lose its way. The statement of the Prime Minister is demeaning and disrespectful to the women and girls of Trinidad and Tobago. Shame. It contributes to an attitude towards females that leads to abuse, affects mental health and self-esteem. It lowers the female gender in the eyes of the nation. And while I'm on that topic, incidentally, the budget presented to us is totally silent on gender development. Totally silent. But given the numerous misogynic utterances of the Prime Minister and the apparent amusement of female members of the cabinet, gauging from their reaction when he made that famous comment, well, I should say infamous, can we really then expect any policies to come out of this government to develop and empower women and girls? When women are empowered, families are empowered. Future generations are elevated. And in saying so, let me also say that we must not leave our men and boys behind. But I want to get back to the current disaster, the flooding, not the PNM, the flooding, that is facing our nation. And let us look at the difference between the leadership under this Rowley-led government and Kamla Persad-Bissessar when she was Prime Minister. Madam President, this is what the last government had in place to deal with disasters, and this was scrapped by the current government. There was the National Operations Center, which was a centralized agency to ensure that all agencies could respond in real time and without delay, so that there would be no glitches, no communication glitches, no response glitches or otherwise. And you know, it's so sad that it is petty politics and perhaps a lack of knowing what to do or a combination of both that has caused the NOC to be watered down and turned into a subdivision of a spy agency. The roles and responsibilities of the NOC were to ensure, to control and coordinate the activities of the response agencies, the regional corporations, the fire services, the army, and so on, to provide operational direction and support to incident managers, to arrange for logistic support, plan ahead to meet the requirements that would follow the incident, and to supervise the direct implementation of the various ministries and agencies in this operation plan. And the ODPM would receive notification of incidents and potential incidents, assess regional or national implication, and determine the need for the ODPM's intervention. And so we have seen the resignation of the acting CEO of the ODPM, but quite frankly, I feel that the lack of response from the ODPM must be attributed to the person who sits at the head of the National Security Council, which is the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, because ODPM falls under national security. What we have seen, instead, we have seen the PNM's government response, which is really a sort of disdain, but I note a sense of cluelessness. When the day the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar was sworn in as Prime Minister, I remember that day she wore a green suit. And as soon as she took the oath, the first act was to remove the coat of arms on the Prime Minister vehicle, and a second act was to put on her boots and go out there and meet the citizens who were affected by flood. And she went to Diego Martin, incidentally. Yet, the present Prime Minister said it wasn't feasible for him to attend. The ODPM said that their communication wasn't what it should have been. And, Madam President, based on releases and photographs, I understand that Balize House had a cookout and a lime. Ooh. Perhaps it is something that the, are you still chairman of the PNM? Might want to look into, because I wonder if that is the response of a political party that is the government that is supposed to care about what is facing the country. And that is the stark difference between the PNM and the UNC. And in fact, I want to go further beyond government and opposition in terms of the political parties themselves. While the leader was out there meeting people, I also want to indicate that even without the resources of government, the United National Congress was able to launch a flood relief team to do several things, to deliver hot meals to those who are trapped in floods, to facilitate the donation of grocery items, clothing, baby supplies, sheets, towels, drinking water to those most in need, to assist with the cleanup of homes, and many, many volunteers, even school children, secondary schools, have been offering their service to help clean the homes, and particularly the homes of the elderly, the differently abled, and the most vulnerable. And I want to take this opportunity to thank, even yesterday I saw that, that a secondary school, Shagona Secondary, their Form 5 and 6s were baking bread to deliver to those affected. That Form 5 and 6 class, I'm probably doing more than the government doing right now for the flood victims. We also have a mobile medical clinic for the distribution of pharmaceuticals to persons with chronic illnesses such as diabetes who may have lost their medication in the floods.
That is a key thing.
And the response, Madam President, has been heartwarming. The outpouring of love and of help from the ordinary citizen is really noteworthy. And I say to the PNM, I say to the government, hashtag that. Hashtag UNC work, hashtag Team UNC. Madam President, I agree with Senator Rambaran, who's former governor of the central bank, and others before him, who indicated that this budget is devoid of inspiration. It really does take the country further into the abyss this sort of PNM hopelessness. This budget tramples on the middle class and the poor by denying them housing, healthcare, and basic amenities. It fails to invest in diversification and to create new income streams. It puts further pressure on the already stressed population by reducing jobs, contrary to what I know the Minister of Labour indicated. It raises taxes, it's raising the price of fuel, for example, which in turn leads to increase in prices of most of the commodities and basic services. This budget also, Madam President, fails to address the rise in crime, the failing public health care system, and further dismantles the social safety net, which protects the most vulnerable in society. This government, as we have seen, continues to pull itself up by the handles while standing in that proverbial bucket. And Winston Churchill, President of the UK in the 1940s and 50s, has a very famous quote attributed to him. I contend for a nation to tax itself into prosperity, yes, you know it, is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handles. I use that, I mentioned that, yes. That's my next point. I mentioned that quote last year and this year because we have not seen any change and any difference in the PNM's approach to its budget. And if the government continues, I may have to use this quote next year. But quite frankly, Madam President, all jokes aside, the fact is that, that we really would have liked to see some innovation in the PNM's approach to budgeting. But this type of budget, this philosophy of the PNM budget, is not unlike what they would have used in the past. And the PNM continues to approach fiscal management with measures which are proven to increase hardships and fail to stimulate growth and development. The government, Madam President, has taken official action during a time of adverse economic conditions to reduce budget deficit using a combination of spending cuts and increases in taxes. That, Madam President, is the basic definition of austerity in A-level basic economics. Contrary to what Senator Lester Henry, who is not here at the moment, said in his contribution yesterday. In fact, he criticized those who were saying that the government was implementing austerity measures, when, quite frankly, what we are seeing and what he said is very different from each other. On the other hand, we saw elements of stimulus being infused in the partnerships approach to budgeting. And this really you really had attempts to use monetary or fiscal policy or stabilization policies in general to stimulate the economy. And it included measures such as lowering interest and quantitative easing, which is proven to kickstart growth during recession where governments use it. However, what we have seen from the government in this 20 2018 budget is no different from last year's budget. And the philosophy seems to be tax, 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 to impose stern, harsh measures on the citizens. And while it has been said time and time again by many of our contributing members here on the three benches, the question is not whether you need to cut. The problem comes in terms of where you are cutting. And there are big questions with regards to this government's priority in their spending. Madam President, I want to use two very simple, basic examples of how this government's policy to cut funding negatively affects people's everyday lives and their lives directly, and how it costs more in the long run. One is garbage collection services, something many of us take for granted. And second is a reduction in spending in drainage. A couple months ago, the Minister of Local Government instructed all regional corporations to reduce the number of days garbage trucks service their areas. Some complied, some did not. Well, first of all, that instruction or decision was rather premature. The minister, in fact, the regional corporation, ought to wait until they see their allocations in the budget to make decisions for the upcoming financial year. To anticipate cuts and to rush to take such action was premature. Secondly, it is improper for the minister to instruct corporations. It is for the corporations to decide. And coming from a government who has spoken about local government reform, spoken about empowering local government, I am surprised to see that the minister would make such an intervention. But fast forward a couple months, and what you have in some regional corporations is that corporations had to find extra money to pay overtime, to engage additional staff, to deal with a horrible garbage pileup, and to avert possible public health hazards, and of course, in areas where drains and so on would be clogged, to clean up those areas. The second example is in drainage and irrigation. And on page 26 of the draft estimates of expenditure program, under head 43, Ministry of Works, in 2007, $34.5 million was allocated to major river cleaning. Well, to that vote alone, you had $34.5 million being allocated and $4.5 million being spent. Unspent balances of $30 million under major river cleaning, infrastructural rehabilitation and flood mitigation, and flood alleviation and drainage program. This, Madam President, represents a gross inefficiency by the Ministry of Works. The neglect of watercourse maintenance, flood alleviation, pumps drainage, results in flooding, which is affecting thousands. And even with the unusual rainfall, certainly there is no denying that poor maintenance of our watercourses has a role to play in the excessive losses we have seen. Losses for businesses to the tune of millions, hundreds of families displaced, and millions of dollars in loss and damages due to the flood. And while I must, last year, perhaps I did mention my budget contribution, that we had a similar instance of unspent balances. The minister, and I know that the Minister of Works, I'm sorry he's not here, I don't know where he went to, but the Minister of Works has had his hands full with scandal after scandal. You have the inter-island ferry, you have so many other issues with regards to inappropriate awarding of contracts and relatives and all kinds of things. But there are enough reasons for him to step down. And I want to urge Minister Rohan Sinanan, wherever he is. I served as a councillor when he was an alderman at Tunapuna Piako Corporation, and I want to urge him to save himself from this PNM before he drowns in their ineptness. And I have to, but on the other hand, I want to commend him for delivering on on a number of projects which were initiated by the People's Partnership Government. He has been under pressure to deliver, and he mentioned in his contribution the highway to Toko. You know, I found it so ironic that the minister would point out the local craft industry, the cuisine, the village culture. He spoke about surfing. And the truth is that all of these things will be destroyed if you take a highway and build a port in Toko. You think if you have a port there, you're going to have surfing going on? I want to ask if the minister or the government has had any consultation with the people of Toko, and if you are going based on your feasibility study, that is something you should share with us. The port in Toko will completely change the way of life of Toko. So the minister is misleading us when he makes it appear. All right. Thank you. Well, it is misleading for us to believe that the port will somehow enhance the local craft industry and the cuisine and the surfing and all those things that were mentioned. Right? So I want to move on because, quite frankly, the buck stops with the minister. Even no matter who is advising you, no matter what studies you are going by, the buck stops with you. You are responsible for these decisions, and you are responsible for these failures. Madam President, I want to move to another area. I really find that this budget is another step in undermining or working against the institutional strengthening that empowers the average citizen, the small man, the middle class. And the PNM's approach and their philosophy towards governance has always, for decades, been one about creating a dependency to preserve their voter bank. The vote has always been more important than the value of the life of the voter. And while the People's Partnership approach has been one of empowerment and creating self-reliance and self-sustainability, to work on hand-ups rather than handouts, the truth is that many of our programs were in areas where we traditionally do not get votes. Our approach was not based on where the vote would be. It was based on improving the quality of lives of every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And there are some institutions which bring about economic independence, which bring government closer to the people, that I think that budget 2018 this budget fails to empower. Credit unions, with regards to economic independence for the small man, local government, with regards to which brings government closer to people, and the Land Settlement Agency, when we want to talk about a land-owning democracy and earning your fair share of what is the state's. And the state really is the people and the sum of the citizens. And the Housing Development Corporation, HDC. And when we speak about empowerment through creating a home-owning society. Credit unions. I know there has been some talk in the manifesto and on previous occasions about legislative reform to improve credit unions. I do look forward to that when it comes. And I know that falls under the responsibility of the Minister of Labor. What we did see with regards to, which I found weakened again, the economic independence of the average citizen. What we had in budget 2018, on page 107, there was one paragraph really that in summary said, corporation tax for commercial banks, a new tax bracket of 35% for commercial banks, effective 1st of May 2018. So everybody goes, yeah, finally, these big banks who have all these profits going to pay 35% corporation tax. So we are going to all pretend that the banks wouldn't pass this down to the customers. And until there are proper regulation for bank fees and bank charges, the banks will continue to dig out our eyes. Independent Senator Small referred to this as daylight robbery. And it is my firm belief that strengthening credit unions and cooperative and friendly society is key to ensuring economic independence of the small man in this country. And some of you may know, and it is well in the public domain, that I myself am a firm believer in SUSU. Madam President, local government. Local government reform has been promised in the PNM manifesto on platforms here in the Parliament. The PNM hosted 14 consultations. I am hesitant to call them consultations because I attended several of them. And what they were really were, I mean this humbly, they really were glorified town meetings. Because the majority of the contributions, and Mr. Khan, you know this, the majority of contributions were really complaints from citizens who felt that they didn't get good service, that their drain was clogged, that they had potholes. And town meetings are good. I myself engaged in many of these as a local government representative and later as a chairman of Tunapuna-Piako Regional Corporation. But I say that it is not a consultation because there was no draft legislation for people to comment on. And to date, 2 years later, we still have no draft legislation for people to, you have been in office for 27 months. I'm keeping count because the countdown is on. And in the budget, under head 42, rural development and local government, there is absolutely nothing to reflect the government's stated intention to empower local government bodies or to decentralize power or to conduct any type of reform. Madam President, we have seen the hiring of some municipal police officers. Honorable Minister of Local Government, I think you will see some challenges when it comes to the hiring of those officers. Even though it may have been done with good intent, several police officers were hired. Now, people would have put in their application. There were no interviews. To date, months after they were assigned to different corporations, you have had no training of those officers. So they are, in effect, acting as security guards. And I think this is an embarrassment to those municipal police officers and an embarrassment to the Ministry of Local Government. That, Madam President, is a feeble attempt. It is not good enough, and it is not local government reform. I also want to suggest that you see the two words rural development in front of the name of that ministry? Just take it off. Just take it off. We have not seen anywhere in budget 2018, or in fact since 2015, since this government came into office, any real trust to develop rural communities. In fact, it has been the total opposite. And I say this because I really believe, as the People's Partnership believed in decentralization, and it's not just about the Ministry of Local Government, but every single ministry must be able to deliver to every part of Trinidad as well as Tobago. But even in the absence of local government reform, it takes political will for work in local government to be done. And I recall being the chairman of Tunapuna-Piako Corporation, and 1 year we had unspent balances of $8,000. This is out of a DP of $17 million, because we were we did our estimates even before the budget was read. As soon as the budget was read, we put in our application for funds. So by December, we were awarding contracts, work started in the dry season, and we had projects delivered on budget, on time, to the people of this country. Madam President, we also have LSA. I want to ask the government to stop labeling squatters as just, random lawbreakers. The Land Settlement Agency distributed numerous certificates of comfort during the term of the People's Partnership. Under the PNM, we have had 0. The LSA is not about giving squatters free land. It is about bringing law and order, human decency, nurturing communities. And what we have seen under this government is no regularization, no containment, no development. And today, I want to remind the government of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25.1, which speaks about decent housing and a decent quality of life. And I feel that LSA and its role as an agency in our society, it contributes to empowering citizens to earn, own, and grow through home ownership and land ownership and financial independence. I move to the public health sector. Madam President, my time is running out faster than I expected. And I just want to briefly say that the allocation in the public health sector there's not really much change. And to me, this is a loss because there are no drugs in the hospital, or in fact, there are many occasions when people do not get pharmaceuticals in the hospital, yet there's monies unspent to purchase pharmaceuticals. This is not a savings. This is mismanagement, this is inefficiency, and it reflects incompetence on behalf of the government to deal with the public health sector. Somebody is not doing their job. Just today, the CNC3 had a story where patients are required to carry their own glucose monitors and strips to the San Fernando General Hospital. There's a shortage of doctors and nurses, and the partnership had initiated the Nursing and Allied Health Academy in El Dorado, which had the capacity to train up to 500 graduates. With the dismantling of GATE and the dismantling of so many other training institutions, I trust that this will stay in place. But the waiting time for surgeries is way too long, and the external patient care program, which allowed people to, from the public hospitals to be treated privately in private facilities, was stopped. From what I understand, the government squashed the program. The Senator West and Lane, the bill referred to a Couva medical facility. I'm not too sure, but the name is the Couva Children's Hospital, and it was built by Kamla Prasad-Bissessy. But I think maybe that is a reflection of her own conscience, that she too believes that the hospital should be opened.
Senator Ameen, you have 5 more minutes.
Oh, God. All right. Madam President, I must speak about crime.
We reached 400.
Madam President, while we have many sick children, we're going before the Children's Life Fund for money for life-saving surgery under the PNM and being rejected. At least 2 babies we know of eventually died. In the meanwhile, the nation was informed that the bill of over $250,000 for heart surgery for a government minister, a man of considerable wealth and the recipient of several government contracts in the past under the PNM.
Please.
Yes. No. And in fact, let me say that sickness has no political eyes. And I genuinely wish the minister a speedy recovery. I will not call any names. I genuinely wish the minister a speedy recovery, and I'm happy that he was able to get that life-saving surgery. But here is the problem. Here is the problem. Here is what is in poor taste. What is in poor taste is that applicants for gate had to be subjected to a means test. Babies who are in need of surgeries are screened and denied, and then they die. But $250,000 for one person's surgery. And Madam President, again I say that the issue is not in the $250,000 for a minister's surgery. The issue is the fact that babies are dying because they cannot get funding from the Children's Life Fund to save their lives. This disparity is an injustice. And in the eyes of the average citizen, in addition to that, you also have a lot of other inequalities and double standards and hypocrisy that will lead to people becoming agitated. You have still unresolved the minister of, who is the guardian of justice, the Attorney General, who is under police investigation for attempting to bug the office of an opposition senator. We don't know what will come out of that. That same man is alleged and widely...
Ameen, please.
And it's widely reported in the newspapers. I could provide the articles of children who were photographed posing with high-powered weapons, and to date, nothing. And the perception is that the PNM is protecting criminals, protecting those responsible for corruption, and I'm so sorry my time is out, because, and I will deal with it another time, to the minister who talk about rape of the treasury and thief, all I have to say, Udicott under Calder Hat, who were the directors, and I have several pages with highlighted information. And I'm sorry that my time has come to an end, and I want to thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to contribute.
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Thank you, Madam President. I am delighted to rise in this House today to participate in the Appropriation Bill for the financial year 2018. I want to thank the Minister of Finance and also the Minister of Planning for putting this together for this budget. I want to say a special thank you to the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Ms. Allyson West, who is a Southerner like myself, for just falling into the ministry. Madam President, I never thought in my life that I would end up in a place like this. Never. Was never in a place like this. And before I say that, Madam President, before I go further, Madam President, I want to say thank you to you for being a balanced president in this House. And if I may say, you are a Southerner again. Saying lyrics. Only good people from South. See, Mr. Khan is a South one too, you know. Minister Khan. Yeah. Madam President, I want to say this evening here that I want to thank Almighty God for giving me this opportunity. As I said, I never thought I would have reached a place like this. I used to only watch on television. I haven't been in office 1 year now. At the end of this month will be 1 year. And I also want to say thank you to the Honorable Prime Minister for giving me this opportunity to be here and also to serve as the first citizen in the city of San Fernando. I served as a mayor, as a councillor, Madam President, I started off as almost as a laborer in the San Fernando Borough Council in 1980. When I left Appropriation College, I went to San Fernando Technical School, and from there I went into the corporation. I worked with, in those days, some of you all might know, they had rubber shocks with roll top. They never had compactors. You had to push one side through the rubbish and empty. I worked in that department. I started off working with the rubber shocks. Then I moved to different departments. I worked in the personnel department, the health department, the audit department, the engineering department, the sanitation department. I worked in almost every department at the San Fernando City Corporation. As I said, I then became a councillor in 2003. And then I became the first citizen, which was the mayor, for the last 3 years. And then I ended up in this honorable house. I intend to serve the citizens of this country. And I intend to work with all the mayors, all the chairmen, all the councillors, and all the aldermen in the 14 corporations. They have my full support, and I know I will have their full support. I am in contact with them on a regular basis, and we intend to work together to serve the citizens of this beautiful country. Madam President, I am not ashamed to say where I started, and I want to go one step further to say, and what inspired me to say this is, I heard Senator Johnson said he used to sweep and mop the casinos or where he worked. I started off cleaning the former Prime Minister's office, Patrick Manning, in 1971. I used to get up in the morning, 5 o'clock, with a bucket. In those days it was galvanized bucket, gazette paper, a mop, and a broom. And when the Honorable Patrick Manning, who passed away, may his soul rest in peace, come into his constituency office, I used to clean that office and then walk to school from Coffee Street to Naparima College. So I know and I understand what service is like. And I appreciate what Senator Johnson said because I connect with him. Because me being in a jacket and in this honorable house doesn't make me better than anybody else on the outside. I had no intention to say this, but I went to the washroom just now and I saw newly appointed Senator Obika, and he said, I was mentioning to him where I came from, and he said I have a story to tell. And I intend to tell a story so young people and people who feel they can't reach anywhere could reach somewhere. Because I said I never expected, I used to walk down on Harris Promenade and Watt City Hall. I never know I would end up there. And I was as the first citizen up there. As I said, I used to watch this on television. So, what Almighty God has for you and me, nobody can take it away. Amen. Nobody. Nobody. And we must struggle in our lives to reach somewhere. I remember, I mean, it's kind of personal, but my father didn't have money for me for my mother to buy milk for me. I lived in a house where our living room set was a car seat. My father came from Rio Claro and came into San Fernando, and we started in San Fernando. So I want to let the public know this and know that you have a dream to follow. And people will help you to get there. And when you get in a position, you must use your position to help people to get somewhere. And as I said, I never dreamed about it. I had no intention. I never knew the Prime Minister. I never knew Dr. Rowley before 2010. And he embraced me and he saw my work because my work speaks for me. I am nothing. I am nobody special. I don't have nothing to offer what nobody else can't offer. But one thing I know, that when I set my mind out to do something, I will get it done. And anything, I am sure, the way you treat people, people will treat you. And I come across people every day in my life. And I have tried not to make no enemies because we need everybody in this world to survive. Everybody. Don't say a harsh word to anybody. Love your neighbors. Love your wife. Love your husband. Love God. I went to a funeral. I mean, I have a speech here. I went to a funeral where 3 people died on the highway. It was a Saturday. This funeral was a Saturday. One of the biggest funerals I saw. The fella died on his birthday. 3 young guys. And I always tell people, when you leave home, you don't know if you'll come back. Hug up your mother. Hug up your wife. Hug up your children. You don't know when you leave home what will happen. You don't know. I watched that mother bawl and cry. And I sympathize with her because you don't know what happened in the morning when he left home. So don't take comrades and colleagues. Yeah, I was in the union too. I forgot to tell you all that. I was a shop. No. I was a daily paid. I wasn't so. I was contractors and general workers trade union. And I was a shop steward for 10 years, so I know how to fight for people and so on. Right? So, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to say that. Madam President, sorry. Well, I knew, so the President will give me a little anyway. And I'm from South. As I said, I intend to say this, so I will motivate other people. Because if I could come from working in a garbage truck in the San Fernando Borough Council then, before it became a city, anybody could reach anywhere. Have a good heart and love everybody. Love, you must love. And love your parents most of all. Because the blessings you'll get from your parents, you could get from nobody. And teach your children the same thing. Madam President, today, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government continues to build on the foundation of all those previous ministers of local government who have gone before. From 1962, where we started with Mr. Saeed Mohammed, and all that followed him after, until Minister Franklin Khan. We had Kamaluddin Mohammed, we had Movin Assam, we had Suraj Rambachan, we had many. But I intend to build on all the work they have done. I am not going to sideline or go against anybody. Madam President, sorry. I listened to my friend, Senator Khadijah Ameen, and she sounds very passionate because she was a local government representative. And I admire her for that. But I want to say to Senator that I heard 2 remarks he made there and they were not correct. I never gave any instructions to cut down any working days from the corporation. That wasn't true. I usually try to be very honest in my undertakings, so I could defend what, well, but I don't want to get into that part, because I never came with the intention in this house to attack anybody. I came to build in this house here. And what you said about the police wasn't right neither, but I will explain that later on. Madam President, I want to say a special thank you to the Honorable, my colleague, Senator Franklin Khan, who held the portfolio that I am holding now. And I have wholeheartedly taken up where he has handed over. He did a lot of work at the Ministry of Rural Development, as all the previous ministers who have gone before. But I want to say a special thank you to him because he has stood by me, and I have called him, and anytime I call him for any advice, he will respond immediately. So thank you, Senator Franklin Khan, and I know you will do good at the ministry where you are now. But I think I'll do a better job in the Ministry of Local Government. Because I have the experience. I have the experience, Senator. I have 37 years experience in local government. I work with the people, and Vision 2030 is putting people first. But you know, when I was the first citizen in San Fernando, I put up a saying in my office, a phrase, and when I first became the mayor, and was putting people first. And I encourage all the councillors, all the aldermen, even the CU and the administrative staff to put people first, because that is the job of a local government representative. You must connect with the people. Madam President, local government reform continues to be on the front burner and will allow municipal corporations to plan better for their towns, villages, maintain their schools, clinics, social services, and sporting facilities. In the coming financial year 2018, the ministry will use its estimated budget of $2.381 billion to do prudent, transparent, and specific spending habits in the communities. As you may recall, the draft budget statement for fiscal 2018 provided the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government with estimated recurrent expenditure in the sum of $2.99 billion, development program in the amount of $231 million, development program expenditure funded from Infrastructure Development Fund in the sum of $51 million. Indeed, these funds will go a long way to add value to the citizens through the many public sector investment programs by the municipal corporations. And Madam President, I want to say, people take councillors for granted, and mayors and chairmen. But anything happen, the first call they make is to a mayor, a chairman, or alderman. And they work very, very hard in the community. And I want to say I want to give a special acknowledgement to all the mayors and chairmen and councillors and aldermen in the 14 corporations. No matter what party you belong to or what corporation you belong to, they work very, very, very hard. And, Madam President, I have here so much to go through, all the work that was done in each corporation, whether it's drains, whether it's roads, whatever it is. There's so much they have done, and I appreciate all what they have done, and the public has to know what they have done too. Madam President, in November, the second week in November this year, as we finish at this level here, I have asked the Permanent Secretary to call a meeting with the 14 corporations, and we are going to deal with productivity. Because for far too long, we have been hearing that everybody wants a corporation work. Why? Because they want to come to work for 7 o'clock and leave at 9 o'clock. Yes, I want to have discussions with all the trade unions, with the administrative staff, and the meeting is carded for the second week in November. And as Senator Ameen just said, when there was in Tunapuna, they put all the projects was done, projected and so on, done before December, and supposed to be completed in next year. So I'm going to put that in place now, call out everybody, that they identify all the projects, interact with the community, find out what they want, and give it to me in writing. Because all the time they get 100 million to spend, or 12 million, or whatever it is, and you still have unspent balances going back. I want them to spend out all the money that is given to them. And that is one of the major factors facing local government. They want to wait last minute to spend the money. You need to spend out all the money. People want drains, they want roads, they want sidewalks, they want things done in the community. So we need play parks, whatever, yeah. Right? We need to have, that's why I'm calling this meeting. And one thing I must say too, Madam President, I had a very good relationship when I was in Mayor of San Fernando with the CEO and the administrative staff. And when I am employed now at the Ministry of Local Government, I have the same relationship with the permanent secretaries and all the staff of the ministry. So they work with me, and we will get the job done. Madam President, also, I came with a speech here, but I'm just getting confused with it, so I will talk. Yes. Madam President, I want to talk a little bit about the flooding that took place. Was plenty of rainfall, a lot of rain came down, excessive rain, and the community felt it. From as early as Thursday, I was not well. I had suffering from the virus and so on, but I made it my business because people want to see you. They don't want to know you have the virus, or you have the cough, or the cold, or a headache, or fever. They want to see you. And I wanted to go because if I didn't go, I feel like I was missing something. So we went out there, and I visited areas like El Carmen, Madras, Barapur, Moruga, Woodland, Pinal Deve, Mayaro, Pasa Central. Where I couldn't visit, I called each chairman or mayor and got an update. And I was getting updates every hour. So I will be able to tell anyone who wanted information, whether it's the media or anybody, I could have told them exactly what was happening, where and when. And Madam President, I want to say that, we speak about love, but what I saw out there, that people coming together from nowhere, you didn't have to ask them for anything, they come in and they bring in food for you. They bring in water, they bring in whatever you can't even imagine it. I walk in water 4 or 5 feet high, and people, I was so hungry some day down in Woodland, and people bring in food and trucks cooking it. I had to even take one and eat it myself. 6 o'clock in the evening, I ate lunch in Woodland from a councillor in Siparia or somewhere. Well, at my position, I don't see UNC or PNM. I see councillors and all of them. Madam President, yes. So they did all what they had to do, and I must say a special thank you to all those corporate citizens, and even some of the ordinary person who came and made sure that somebody had something to eat. I remember seeing 2 girls in Woodland, around 18 and about 16. And they was walking almost half a mile in the water, 4 feet, 5 feet sometimes, to get to somebody home to go for food. And I stopped them and I asked them, I said, where you all going? And they said, they're going for food. And it breaks my heart to know this exists. When you think you see in trouble, there are people seeing 10 times worse trouble than you all, than us. And I asked the army truck to take them half a mile, somebody was cooking for them, and bring them back home. And when they were coming back in the army truck, they was sending kisses for me and telling me thank you and so on. People appreciate kindness. Yes, Senator Ameen. I never really talk to you, but... but she from South. Well, I have to be careful about talking. I'm watching the audience to see if I see anybody in the background there. So, Madam President, a lot of people gave back, and I must say that we were out there and we were helping the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Agriculture, we had National Security, and but social development, the councils and the aldermen doing the assessment to see who need appliances and so on. And by next week, who bring in the claims, the councils will interact with them, and they will be getting their fridges, stoves, mattresses, whatever. But a lot of corporate people, look like at the ministry I made a call, and people call me and they give mattresses, they give kiss bread, give me about 3,000 loaves. We took it around to the community. Tomorrow morning I'm going out again, and it's only because I had Senate and I'm not going out, but I prefer to be out there than here. I really like being out there with the people. Yeah, so I really enjoy. Yeah, so tomorrow we'll be out there again, and the first thing in the morning, and trying to assist people. And CPEP is coming in now to help people clean up, and power wash, help them move the old furniture. The corporations will be coming around because now is the time people need disinfect. And I'm making an appeal. I've never been on. I know people watching here to give disinfect, bleach, garbage bag, mops and broom. Please give it to the corporations or to the people who are affected. And I must say, people show and they give, and they just, people, there's a joy in giving than receiving. You all know that? There's more joy in giving than the one who receiving. Yeah, I know that. I know that. And the people out there feel so happy when they get something. Yeah, and we must always give. And Madam President, one thing when I was at the ministry, when I now came in there, one thing I decided to do was to form a volunteer network in each corporation. And it worked. Because when I was the mayor of San Fernando, I formed a volunteer network there. And it really worked. When Haiti was in trouble, I put one container in front City Hall. And I asked for the community to help. And people came from all over Trinidad. And you know how much containers I filled? 14 containers. 14 40-foot containers. People came from Toco, Sandy Grande, Pinal, Cedros, anywhere you could think about, Diego Martin. And they just wanted to give and give. And we just had to get containers and containers. And the people who give the containers volunteer. So it didn't cost us nothing. So I came up with the idea, not knowing that I would end up in this ministry, to use that same template to get that done. And the volunteer work, the last volunteer network I launched was in Princestown, and they fill almost a container to Dominica. And the volunteer network is not only for helping the less fortunate and so on. Yeah, it is for that too, but I remember we did something else again, where we had a day of care for the homeless people. And I know because I remember Senator Ameen saying that we used to cook food for the homeless people in South on a weekend. And we did this day of care in San Fernando. And you would be amazed to know how many senior doctors and nurses came out and gave up their time for 2 days, a Saturday and a Sunday in San Fernando. And people cut the hair of the homeless and give them clothes and so on. It was something so beautiful to see. that, you know, people take these people and see them on the road and you throw food for them on the ground, and like, you don't treat human beings like that. So we did that, and out of that day of care, something came up in San Fernando where businessmen came together and decided to put up a place, a building, to something like a soup kitchen. And 4 or 5 contractors came together, and we put up this building in San Fernando, so people won't throw food on the ground and give you a soft drink on the ground and you had to lie down on the ground. I didn't like that. So I decided to do that. But what I intend to do, because it's 1 year now and nothing has happened with the building, so I want them to use it, and I'm going to call a meeting with the mayor of San Fernando to ensure that they get that building into action, because people need help. Madam President, when I took up this office in November, it was just after the local government election. And you know how the saying goes, everybody said they don't see the councillor. And I know that because I was a councillor and I used to go and see everybody every weekend, try and visit every household. I said, take a month and do that. When you go for the whole month and they're still saying they're senior, right? You will know that. Even members of parliament, that will happen too. So I decided to do a national cleanup campaign in Trinidad. And I started in January of this year. I made a call to the business community and the contractors and the corporate citizens to donate their equipment and their time to come and help Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, I couldn't believe the overwhelming support that the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government got. We got backhoes, excavators, we got dump trucks, I couldn't believe the amount of equipment we got. We went around the whole of Trinidad and Tobago and did the most we could do. All corporations was involved, mayors, chairmen, aldermen, everybody, even members of parliament on both sides were involved, because this had no discrimination with anybody. You come out, and I was glad to see that the members of the opposition came and took part and were part of this cleanup campaign. And that's what we want. I heard Senator Richards said something, his closing off comments, and it reminded me, if we come together in this country for the people, we will really achieve something, you know. We can't fight all the time. Pardon me? Yeah, we could achieve it. Because I am in this house here, and I am not going to fight nobody. I'm going to fight for the people of this country. I am not going to fight the opposition. I will use this office and this house here to fight for the people who are out there, because the people need us. So the National Cleanup Campaign was very, very successful. I never boasted about it. I never told anybody anything that, because schools were involved, any NGOs were involved, religious organizations were involved. No matter what organizations, everybody was involved. And so the first time I'm going to say today, I'm going to reveal to the national public that with this cleanup campaign that we had, it saved this country over $150 million. It's the first time I reveal these figures today. Over $150 million. We did, President, we dealt with derelict vehicles. We pick up over about 5,000 derelict vehicles throughout Trinidad, and I am sure there are 10 times that amount still outside there. We dealt with dilapidated buildings across the country, and we dealt with tires that were people had all over the country, just show them all over the place there. We clean up tires, we clean open lots, we clean drains, and I must say everybody took part. I couldn't believe in some areas people just came out and was helping, putting up their old stove and fridge on trucks and so on. Last time this happened, I think, was in the NAR time. How much years ago? I was. But I remember this on a large scale was with NAR. On that thing, Robert Myers, I think. Yeah. NAR in 1986. And you know, and this was so successful that I used to look forward to going to this corporation, because we used to do the cleanup for the week, and I miss it. So what I'm going to do now, because everybody was involved, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask, the dry season is coming up, I'm going to ask each corporation to do it individually now, because it will give them a chance to interact with the people who put them in office. It will give them a chance to meet.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, Madam President, I have 50 pages. I ain't read one yet. Yeah, but I want to say something here, Madam President. Municipal police plays a very significant role in each municipality. The ministry continues to work in close collaboration with the Ministry of National Security, Service Commission Department, and the Statutory Service Commission to develop and implement a system that will expand our municipal police. Cabinet approved for recruitment, selection, and filling of 1,107 municipal police positions in June 2016. This initiative will ensure that municipal corporation is staffed with no less than 100 municipal police. I am happy to report that in fiscal year 2018, we have new police constables trained and ready to assume duties. Well, we will have that in 2018, sorry. In February of this year, we advertised for the position of municipal police constable and received over 4,000 applications. After shortlisting, 541 of those candidates were selected to write the examination, with a total of 488 passing and moving into the interview phase. In the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, they are supporting us in the interview process. Once these candidates are cleared to begin training, the Office of Law Enforcement Policy will start a rigorous 4-month training process, which has been tailor-made to suit the responsibilities of municipal police. Interviews for these 488 candidates began on Wednesday, 9th August, and continue throughout this month, with a panel consisting of representatives from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, National Security, OLEP Service Commission. So, Madam President, I want to say that this is ongoing, and we will have these municipal police in the system for sure. And just like how Senator Ameen spoke about the local government reform was promised on or before 2019. It is in the legislative process right now in the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. And Madam President and members, I want to say that there will be local government reform. So we'll enter into the next local government election with local government reform. Madam President, I just want to say it's a privilege for me to be here to work with you and all the members in the House present. And I want to remind myself and remind all of us here that this job is a temporary job. You don't know when is your last day, because you have a leader and you have your family. And I want to encourage you all to put your family first, because after this job, you have to go back to your family. Right? I want to say, before I close, I want to thank Senator Johnson. You were out when I was speaking, that I connected with you. Because just as you used to sweep and mop and clean, that's where I started off. And right now, I am cleaning and sweeping the whole country. I started off cleaning in 1971, and this is 2017, and I am cleaning. And I won't stop cleaning, because that's my calling. So to the young senators, the 3 new young senators there, I want to say congratulations to you. And I wish you all the best. And always look for the positive in people and the good that they have to offer. Madam President, it's a pleasure working here. And when I heard Senator Raffoul speak just now...
Minister, I'm sorry, but your time is up. Honorable Senators, I'm sure you're going to join with me in congratulating the Minister on his movement. Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, like my colleague from Rural Development and Local Government, I too never expected to be here. But I welcome the challenge, and I look forward to serving the country. Madam President, I was fortunate that a lot of my colleagues addressed a lot of the issues raised, so that has limited what I have to address, and I will try to address the outstanding issues with time permitting. Before I do that, Madam President, I too would like to congratulate the new senators and temporary senators. I would like in particular to congratulate my colleague, Minister of Public Utilities, who I thought had a very outstanding maiden presentation. Madam President, Senator Wade Mark, who is not here today, I don't remember if he was ill or out of the country, but he raised a couple of issues. He raised concerns regarding the use of the foreign exchange by Republic Bank. I would leave Republic Bank to deal with the veracity or otherwise of that. Yeah, but if there's a genuine concern, I would suggest he raise it with the central bank, which is where we have a governor there who is interested in and committed to controlling the foreign exchange situation, and I would recommend that he go there. The oil and gas price, I would like to thank Senator Khan and Senator Small for, I think, very adequately dealing with that. The government is confident that we have identified a very realistic price, and we think that the budget is soundly based on that. Increases in super and diesel. Madam President, the government has no desire to put undue burdens on the population. But I recall shortly after your last Minister of Finance came into power, he indicated to the country via a presentation to the TT Chamber that he recognized the need to remove the subsidies on gas. He said he would start with premium, which he did, but it seemed he didn't have the fortitude to follow through. this government was left to take on that difficult task because we do not have a choice. We are spending $800 million on gas and oil subsidies. We cannot afford it. So it is not being irresponsible, it is in fact being responsible. It is allowing us to retain some of the funds that we would otherwise spend to direct them to specific purposes which would benefit those most in need. So I don't see how you can responsibly challenge that position. Senator Roach, I'm sorry he is not here, asked the question about the status of the CSO reform, and I would like to indicate to him that the National Statistical Institute is to be launched by the middle of next year. The project to get it off the ground is currently being undertaken by Dr. John Prince, leading an implementation team which includes labor, business, public servants. I feel his pain with respect to the Hazley Crawford and the GPAIR facilities, and I undertake to speak to the Minister of Sport so that when he comes back next year, he will not have to repeat it. I also feel his pain regarding the differently abled, and he was not here for the AG's presentation yesterday, when the AG said that the bill to deal with that issue is going to come before the House shortly. Senator Danitzer and a couple of the other independent senators raised some interesting suggestions. We always welcome suggestions. We pay attention to them. We listen. We may not agree that they're all workable or they're all relevant for this time, but we will take them on board. We will consider them, and we will determine what we will use. I liked Senator Richards' reference to looking at a more social media type approach to the TTP concept, and certainly something we are focusing on. Because we are using a nostalgic name doesn't mean we will operate TNT the way it was operated in the past. Senator Small raised the issue, and a couple of other senators raised the issue of the bank passing on the increase in taxes. I know that is a concern. I would just like to let you know that consideration is being given to addressing the issue of the escalation in charges, and we will advise you as the determination is made. Another pet peeve you have is the electronic payments. I know that. My colleague in the Minister of Works, I understand, assured you that we are fixing the problem before the end of the year in the licensing authority. I am committed when the Revenue Authority comes in to ensure that electronic payments are properly due at that, is properly on board at that time. It makes no sense to me that in 2017, the Board of Inland Revenue is still receiving millions of dollars in personal checks. The time it takes to certify that and to get the cash flow in the government's hands makes no sense. We are dealing with that. And it's an issue that all of the ministries are dealing with. Senator Choate, the issue of the seed funding and ensuring that people are able to access it, know how to use it, are properly trained. We are dealing with that. The Minister of Trade is looking at her constituents in that context and ensuring that where they need help in beefing up their business skills, that is going to happen. So hopefully we will not see a repeat of the prior experience. Processes and efficiencies, we're also seeking to address that. I'm hoping that you will see a transformation in that regard when the Revenue Authority is introduced. I go back to that because it's a particular passion of mine. But just to indicate that it is an issue that we are aware of and we are working to address it. Petrotrain restructuring, what does it mean? It does not mean the sale of assets. We have a board, a new board in which the government has confidence. They are going to look at the issue of Petrotrain and determine how best to treat with it. So when that determination is made, we will inform the citizenry as to what the plans are. Senator Obika You mentioned the undercollection of VAT and income tax, Senator Hosein, that it is a taxing budget. A lot of other people refer to this taxing budget. And I don't see the basis for that conclusion. What taxes have we introduced? We have made a deliberate decision to not increase the tax burden of the majority of the citizenry. We have looked at collecting taxes, which we need because we have to replace the massive taxes lost from the energy sector and elsewhere. So we have no choice but to seek to increase our revenue. And what we have tried to do was ensure that the vulnerable are not touched. An option which many countries impose in a situation like this, increase income tax, burden the employees more. We have stayed away from that. Income tax remains where it is. So what taxes have we in fact imposed? We have imposed 30% tax across the board on companies. But that means an additional tax burden, maximum tax burden on companies of $50,000 a year, full stop. That is all that measure will generate in taxes. We have imposed 35% tax on the banks. And yes, that is a significant increase, but we are of the view that the banks can bear the increase. And if they can bear the increase and it will benefit all of us, why not? So that I am of the view that that is a reasonable measure in these difficult times. And I really would like to see you being responsible and accepting that position. We have imposed a 12.5% royalty on the oil companies. Again, who can dispute that the oil companies are able to bear the burden of an additional tax, especially having regard to the fact that for the next 5 years, unless we do something, we're not expecting to pay any tax of consequence. So why should they not, when they are extracting our wasting resource, make a contribution to the coffers that can't be seen to be unreasonable? Exactly, thank you, Senator Small. We would be irresponsible if we just let them take the wasting resources and not receive any benefit for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So what is the problem with the imposition of these taxes? I cannot understand it. We're taxing the poor, we can't tax our way. What is that about? The next, I'm getting there, give me a minute. I'm sorry, Madam President. The next group of people that we have taxed, the gaming establishments. Senator Johnson, I feel your pain. I feel the pain of Betty. Oh, I think that is the lady's name who you chose. As I said, the government made a deliberate decision not to interfere with the tax burden on individuals. So we were trying to protect that group of people. I am astounded that the entity on whom we place the tax is threatening the employees with bearing the full burden of that tax. Why are they saying that you must go home because they must pay more tax? You indicated, you gave me an example of the fact that they already pay tax. $18 million, you said, 8 of which were 8 million was on the gaming tables, and a lot of the balance was on PAYE. The gambling establishments do not pay PAYE, Senator Johnson. That comes from your salary. You pay that PAYE. So why, in light of that, can they not contribute a little more? What taxes do the gaming industry members pay? They pay import duty on the machines that they bring in. Everybody who brings anything into Trinidad and Tobago pays import duty and VAT on the importation. They pay and a portion of the NIS due in respect of each of the employees. Hopefully, you're right, all employers in Trinidad and Tobago pay that. They pay VAT on their purchases. I would be surprised if anybody could convince me that they do not pass on that VAT when they sell their alcohol or whatever it is. So what burden do they actually bear, and why are they seeking to have you bear that burden? If every employer in Trinidad and Tobago adopted the position that they have adopted, where would we be? The energy employees aren't coming out and saying, oh, their employers are sending them home. The bank employees are not coming out and saying, oh, their employers are sending them home. So why does the only industry in Trinidad and Tobago that does not pay corporation tax on their profits threaten their employees with sending them home? That is not the government's fault. So, Senator Johnson, as I said, I feel your pain. If your employer does follow through with this threat, the Minister of Labour suggested that there was a program, an employment program she's very excited with. She will be able to assist. But we are seeking to protect people like you and Betty. That is what we're trying to do. And what surprises me as well, Madam President, is the fact
Minister, thank you for giving me. Senator Johnson, in his contribution, pleaded several times for the minister or perhaps yourself to meet with the representatives. I want to ask if you will be willing to meet with them.
Madam President.
Yes.
Yes.
Willing to meet with them.
You are not their spokesperson, Senator Johnson.
Oh, you can, but she could. Yep, indeed. Don't worry.
She's doing a much better job than you. Much better job.
Senator Johnson, Madam President, Senator Johnson also referred to the fact that they are looking forward to the introduction of the legislation on the Gaming Commission because they think that will help solve the problem. The PNM government is quite prepared and quite eager to introduce this legislation. The legislation was drafted, the legislation which we are bringing before the Parliament was drafted by them. Ages ago. When I met with your members, because you're saying you need consultation, I met with some of your members last week, and one of the people attending that meeting asked me, why, if we are moving forward with legislation drafted by the opposition, is it taking so long? I could not give him an answer, but I suspect I know what the answer is. They are not concerned about it like they pretend, because it's gone to Joint Select Committee. They didn't attend, they weren't available for the meetings of the Joint Select Committee called by the Minister of Finance. We need a special majority to pass that, so we need their support. I don't know that we will get it. We will find out. The history has indicated to me that we're not likely to get it unless, like the banks did when we were trying to get FATCA through the House before the country shut down, the people come out and protest and put pressure on them. So you will judge during the course of the debate on this issue where your support lies. Who is actually protecting your position? So.
But what is this?
I don't understand. Free will. Yes. This is what we do.
Yes, that's
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, that was unfortunate, but I really hope that Senator Johnson got my point.
Minister, please, just have a seat. Members, please. Let us listen to the minister in silence as she winds up. Minister, continue.
Madam President, I really hope that Senator Johnson understood what I was saying and he can share it with his colleagues, because they really need to understand that the taxing measure is not the problem that would lead to their termination. I really hope, and that the government is not seeking to penalize the workers. I hope you understand that. Senator Hosein, who is not here as well, he's ill, asked about procurement.
Madam President, in accordance to Standing Order 14.5, I beg to move that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The Senate will continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand. Minister, continue.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as I was indicating, the new Senator Hosein raised the issue of procurement. It seems to be a burning issue for the opposition, all of a sudden. The opposition was in power from 2010 to 2015, and procurement was a burning issue. So one would have thought that having a special majority, they would have passed the procurement legislation early enough in their term to have some impact. It was not passed until November of 2014, just at the twilight of their term. And then they had 9 months or 10 months, and what did they do to operationalize this legislation? It appears nothing. So I don't know why all of a sudden it's a burning issue. Maybe if we had it during that period, we would have avoided things like life support, EMBD, the Beetham Wastewater Project, the slew of contracts that were issued just before they exited office in 2015. Maybe we would have avoided that. So, in my view, the opposition has no moral authority to ask for legislation. However, for the benefit of the independent bench and for the benefit of the public, who I'm happy to learn really pays attention to the Parliament channel, we will indicate to you, Madam President, that the government has done what it needs to do to get this legislation operationalized. It has put measures in place in the ministries and departments and other procuring entities to be in a state of readiness. All have access to the draft model handbook and draft special guidelines to guide preparations. On the 6th of July, the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago approved the structure of procurement units for ministries and departments, which will allow for completion of the staffing exercise. And 73 change agents were trained in the issue to be addressed in procuring entities. The only thing we're waiting on, Madam President, is the appointment by His Excellency the President of a procurement regulator. We have communicated that His Excellency would have advertised the post and so on, and so we expect an appointment shortly. As soon as that is made, we're ready to run with procurement legislation. We are committed to doing it. You asked about the sale of assets. And who raised this issue? Senator Shirky-Soon, asked about the sale of assets and what we're doing, and we're wasting assets and depleting assets. Senator Shirky-Soon, I'm sure it would have registered with you that we have a significant shortfall in income. We cannot imagine a family getting up one day and losing 93% of its income. It can't just go from that position to being able to live with what is left. It has to get there gradually and responsibly. It can't say to its children, well, you need to stop going to school, or, you have to stop eating, or we have to move from this house into a shovel. We need to move. We need to move there slowly. So in moving there slowly, we are looking at the options of how to finance the gap in the revenue. And one of the things we have to do is sell assets, but we are doing that in a responsible manner. The Minister of Finance in the other place would have said, Madam President, that he intends to ensure that these assets are not lost to Trinidad and Tobago. The intention is to transfer the assets to citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. He's setting up a fund, a mutual fund, where the parts of the asset will be transferred to that, and individuals in Trinidad and Tobago can invest in that fund. The economists among us will say government, the economists among us, including Senator Raffoul, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, would say that government should be a facilitator. And how do we facilitate? We have to get out of areas where we're not supposed to be involved. Divesting these assets to members of the Society of Trinidad and Tobago will accomplish that objective, will give us the money that we have to earn while we get to a position where our core revenue equals our expenditure. And this government is committed to doing that. Yeah, I've spoken about Senator Small's comment on the bank charges already. One of the senators, I believe it is Senator Ameen, raised the issue of MHDL and the fact that we have frittered away that asset. I would like to remind my colleagues that the sale of MHDL was not done under the PNM. And I would like to remind my colleagues that when the PNM came into power, we had to try to unravel the issue that arose from that sale. We are still involved in litigation to sort that out. So just to remind you that we are still trying to clean up messes that were made when we were not in government. Senator Ramdeen also asked about the status of the unfinished headquarters of Petrotrin. Again, Senator Ramdeen, not something that the PNM can accept responsibility for. In 2010, the then board, and who was in power in 2010, the then board approved the termination of 9 construction contracts in progress in Petrotrin, including the new corporate headquarters. that was followed by claims made by the contractors, a couple of the contractors, and we are still involved in litigation dealing with those claims in respect of the termination of those contracts, which appear to be arbitrary. So, and it was only recently that the Petrogen board said, okay, having regard to everything that has transpired, it will abandon the project of upgrading the headquarters. It may be that the new board may come to a different decision, but the genesis of the issue with respect to the headquarters did not come out of decisions taken by the PNM. So how could you in good conscience ask about the status of the board? Okay. Senator Shirky-Soon again urged the government, thank you for recognizing that the government under the leadership, not leadership of the government, through the efforts of the Minister of Finance, has been very successful in reducing the expenditure of the government. A significant reduction in a short time, from the wastage of $63 million down to $50 million. Billion. So I thank you for recognizing that and for giving us credit for that, Senator Shirky-Soon. But you said, you asked quite reasonably, what are we doing about the revenue? Because there's still a gap, and we recognize there's a gap. But unlike the previous government, who spent more the more we got, we are taking a responsible approach to bridging the gap between expenditure and revenue. What are we doing? We are ensuring that we receive at least an acceptable minimum amount of income from the energy sector. And we're doing that through the 12.5% royalty. We are introducing the long-abandoned Revenue Authority. The legislation was almost ready in 2009. The discussions had been held, decisions had been made, we were ready to go. The country made the dire mistake of putting another party in power, and we are left today with two agencies which the bulk of Trinidad and Tobago will admit are not efficient. They don't collect all the taxes that are there. As I told you during my presentation, that there's an estimate of between $11 billion and $18 billion outstanding in taxes from the populace. If we had that today, we wouldn't have a gap. So we now have to come back and restructure and re-engineer and reintroduce the Revenue Authority, but we're committed to doing it. 2018 is the time when it will be done, and that will assist in bridging the gap in the revenue, because there are simple measures that we can use to go after the people who are not paying their taxes. I was part of the VAT administration when we introduced VAT, and we did simple things. We sent out mystery shoppers to go to the hardwares, and when they said to you, you want to invoice or you don't want to invoice, that would determine whether you pay VAT or not, we would send in somebody to assess them. We would go to the FETs and count the number of people going into the FETs and say, you owe me the price of the ticket by the number of people by 15%. We did that with people, well, I won't call any names, but we did that and it was very effective. And what happened? The VAT office that was treated as a separate arm operating efficiently was reintegrated into the whole, and everything fell apart. So we do not have to do difficult scientific things to ensure that we increase the revenue. We just need to have the right attitude. We need to be able to make people accountable, which they aren't really now in the public service, and introduce those simple measures, and we will make a difference. And we are committed to doing that. 2018 is the year. We are also reintroducing the long-abandoned property tax. This is another pet peeve of mine. The government of 2010 came in on the mantra, axe the tax, scared the population beyond real belief that they were going to die and collapse and starve and turn into paupers from the introduction of this property tax. We have been paying tax on property since the 1940s. Nobody has died. Nobody has lost their property. Nobody has starved as a result of the payment of property tax. The Minister, Senator Ameen, asked, how could we be stopping garbage collection? That's one of the things that the property tax should pay for. My colleague said that didn't happen, but that's one of the things that property tax should pay for. It doesn't matter who collects it. That is one, Madam President. I'm sorry, I will address you. So, having abandoned the property tax for 5 years, done away with all the information that would have been collected, so we have to restart, so we've lost another 2 to 3 years. We are now seeking to introduce this property tax. As I said earlier, what we have done with the property, let me tell you what the problem with the land and milling taxes was. We had land and milling taxes and municipal corporation tax, which was a land and milling tax but collectible by the municipalities. So under the second act, what happened was that the municipalities were given the authority to choose their rate of tax up to 10% and do their own assessments. So that in Port of Spain, the last assessment was done in the 1940s. In Point Fortin, it was done in 2000 and something. In San Fernando, it was done in 1990 something. So you have different assessments done at different times with different results. So you have a mansion in Goodwood Park where the owner is paying $300, and you have a normal family-sized home in Point Fortin where they're paying $5,000. That was inequitable. Right. We needed to bring back a uniform system of land and milling taxes, and also we needed to update the valuations. That is what the land and milling tax, the property tax is about. That is all it is about, Madam President. That was all the property tax was about. It was not about penalizing people, imposing an undue burden. So that the fear that was engendered in the population was unbelievable, Madam President. What the property tax seeks to do is it seeks to uniform the process. You have all the valuations done at the same time, so there's no inequity. You impose lower rates. So we used to pay 6.5% on the value of the property. Now we have agricultural holdings paying 1%, residential properties paying 3%, commercial properties paying 5%. The only people who are paying more than 5% are the industrial properties. And the rate is not higher than it was previously. So the difference will come from the current values of those properties. And the property should have been revalued periodically in any event. So the monster that is seen to be the property tax is not a monster. Let us wait, see what our valuations are. There are basis in the legislation for challenging it if we think it's unreasonable, but it is reasonable for people who want services in their communities to pay for those services. Let us be responsible, support it. Stop bringing frivolous court action that will delay the implementation of the process. Let us move forward so that we can serve Trinidad and Tobago better. And the final thing we are doing to bridge the gap, as I said earlier, is that we are seeking to collect some additional taxes from those people who we think can best afford it. The banks, the casinos, the oil companies, all reasonable. And we have a plan to in the medium term, bridge that gap and get us out of this place. And don't get back to the place of irresponsible spending. That is the plan. Madam President, on the property tax issue, you would, yes, there are individuals with houses who are concerned about what it will cost them, and I am convinced without seeing any evaluations that it will be bearable. But you know where we have lost the income? We have lost the income from the industrial properties, Atlantic LNG. The BPs of this world, the Shells of this world, the MHTLs, those are the people who would have been making a decent contribution to the coffers. We have lost 7 years of that income. Irresponsible, Madam President.
You saved millions over the last 7 years.
You're planning to bring individual first, so that is not accurate.
Don't take that young man.
What's that? Yeah, no, that's fine. Madam President, my time, please.
5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Madam President, I'm running out of time. Let me say to the independent senators, I appreciate your contributions. As I said, I have heard them, I have noted them. We will take account of them and see what measures we can introduce. This from Senator Danisa, senators, all of you, I thought were thoughtful and gave valid recommendations that we will consider. And we hope to come back next year and show you how your suggestions have helped us to get to the right place. The spotlight in particular, I am happy that you appreciated the effort. The Prime Minister is committed to moving this forward because we also saw the benefit of it. Yes, it would have been better received, I think, if it had happened earlier. But as I think the Prime Minister said on that occasion, it is not, the budget is not a one-time thing. It is something that is developing and growing. So the fact that we learned of the suggestions late doesn't mean that we will ignore them. To the opposition, I appreciate that your role is to oppose, but I beg you not to oppose for opposing's sake. Challenge us, ask us questions, call us to account, because this is what the citizenry require of you. But please do it in a responsible manner, please. Madam President, we have tough times ahead, and it calls for sacrifice of all of us. It calls for responsibility from all of us. But together, if we do it right, we can get this done. We can benefit the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And isn't that why we're all here? To ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago benefit. The theme of the budget debate in this House, Madam President, seems to be based on different calypsos. So I have one. I'm not going to sing, but it is the Mighty Sparrow. And he said, you put a hand, and I put a hand, and we will see. For big or for small, in no time at all, prosperity. There is no other way to do it. Show your patriotic spirit, unity, somehow. If Trinidad ever needed you, is now. Thank you.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2018 be read a second time. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2018.
In accordance with Standing Order 57-2, I beg to move that the bill not be committed to a committee of the whole Senate.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2018 not be committed to a committee of the whole Senate. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Honourable Senators, the question therefore is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2018 be now read a third time and passed. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2018.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, just permit me to say that, seeing that we have come to the end of this budget debate, I want to thank all senators, both on this bench, on the independent bench, and the opposition bench, for their contribution in making this debate the success that it has been. With that said, Madam President, I now beg to move that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Honourable Senators, before I put the matter of the adjournment, and because I have a captive audience, I want to raise two issues with you. Just the first issue is I have had cause to circulate procedural bulletin number 1. And I ask all of you, as we are adjourning to a date to be fixed, to read it and digest it, and let's put it into action at our next sitting. But the second issue I want to raise with you is that on Monday, the 30th of October, from 10 a.m., we are hosting our 15th National Youth Parliament. It starts at 10. We're going to be having lunch at 12:30, and members are invited both for the sitting and for the lunch. Now, we have sent out notices, and we have received an indication of who has said they will attend, and it's not very encouraging. I want to just put in a little plea for the young people. They want to meet the members of the Senate and the members of the House. It's a big thing for them. And it is an opportunity. The theme of this year's debate is the root causes of and solutions for the radicalism of youth towards the establishment of a counter-radicalism youth policy. It's a relevant issue, and I think, we'd like to hear what the young people have to say. So I invite you to rethink your Monday schedule. Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, the young people would love to meet you. Senator Haynes, the young people would love to meet you. Senator Raffoul, Senator Richards, you have said you will be attending. Senator Mahabir, Senator Small, I can call out everybody's name if you want, but I will not do that. So I'm just asking if you can reconsider your schedule for Monday, please. Honourable Senators, the question therefore is that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. Those in favour say aye.